Okay, my Straight Talk family, when you hear that theme song, you know it's time for another edition of Straight Talk and time for me to say a very pleasant night to St. Kitts and Nevis, a very pleasant night to the entire Caribbean region, and really I should say I should say greetings to the world, because we are on the World Wide Web, so we reach and touch you all over the diaspora. Some of you are in Africa, there's some of you in Europe, there's some of you in Asia, and there are a whole lot of you all over North America. So I'm at liberty to say good night. I will say good morning, and I will also say good afternoon, because one of such greetings will be applicable to the region in which you now find yourselves. So welcome again to Straight Talk. And as promised tonight, we'll have a special guest. I'll tell you about him in a moment. But for the first-timers, we do have first-timers each time around. And we thank all those who continue to share the link. Because as you do, we get first-timers. And I trust and hope it's not going to be your last time. And just to let you know that if you love it, tell the whole wide world. If you don't, just look for patches and said, tell me. But for the first timers, Straight Talk is a public service program that facilitates and promotes free, underline free expression on all issues of national, regional, and international interests, with the legal, environmental, technological, social, and or economic issues. What about the political issues as well? On this program, we also try to raise the level of national consciousness. We try to raise the level of regional and international discourse as well, by alerting our people to their rights, to their responsibilities, and certainly to their obligations. My name is Ian Patches Liburd, and I give Almighty God thanks for blessing me with yet another opportunity to join you in conversation on yet another occasion. So my Straight Talk family, as your host, I continue to pledge to remain an untiring advocate of truthfulness. As always, I want to seek the courage needed, that our high calling to fulfill, that we all may know the blessing of the doing of God's will. So we speak for the truth and right. We stand firm for godly justice, and we bring evil things to light. So Straight Talk is not about sensationalism. It's not about the creating excitement, especially at the expense of accuracy, because we lean on the facts. And it's my bounden duty to present, as always, the unvarnished truth, my Straight Talk family, the unvarnished truth, the plain truth. So we think and we focus especially on governance, not only in St. Kitts and Nevis, but governance throughout the region, throughout the world, transparency, integrity. And this program joins us together with people across our federation. Through this program, we are joined with people in the diaspora all around the world. Some we know, and some we have met. Some will agree with the positions of truth we advance on Straight Talk, and some will disagree, and that's fine, because we promote diversity, a diversity of views. But what will sadden me, my people, is if we ever start to become disagreeable. So let's thank Almighty God nonetheless for helping us to understand, oh, how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. So let's hope and pray for the day when we will all sing His praise together. And my Straight Talk family, for the first timers in particular, we are a participative program. By that I mean it includes your calls and we include your emails. And if you're so minded calling, the numbers are on your screens. And if you're one of them who like what I call the cloak of anonymity, we give you access via our email program. That too is on your screens. And for those who have the Alexa app, you have access to Straight Talk as well. Just say, Alexa, play Massive Vibes Radio. Some of you have made donations to support our efforts here on Straight Talk. And we say, a big thank you. I can reassure you that no matter what's the size of your contribution, it has helped and it will continue to help this important service. Those who wish to donate can simply scan the screen on your code or scan the code on your screen to access the payment form. A very simple process. And we thank you again for your support and for helping us to keep the dialogue alive. A special welcome. We cannot ever forget our junior brigade. Young Dwayne, Tristan, Shama, Kevin, Young Rue Costa, Jamal, Travis, and Trevon. I saw them in church on Sunday, believe it or not. Neema, my grandson, and Soraya is back. How about that special lady in St. Louis? But tonight, we are going to forego our observations in review. And I know that there are some very interesting observations, my Straight Talk family, very interesting observations to address. But I must give my ultra important guests maximum time on Straight Talk tonight. However, I believe it would be remiss of me if I did not extend condolences to the family of Renford Evelyn, also known as Mop. Mop met his tragic death last week in that vehicular accident over there in Keys Gut. And we, along with his daughters and entire family, are left to mourn his loss. And all I can say, that death is a process, but may his soul rest in eternal peace. So without further hesitation, my Straight Talk family, I here and now welcome my guest, who is none other than the Honorable Alan Michael Chastanet, a businessman, politician, former Prime Minister of St. Lucia, and now leader of His Majesty's loyal opposition. And I bid you, sir, a very pleasant night and welcome to Straight Talk.
Well, great
Alan?
to be here. It's going to be a historic night. You have elections in Trinidad and elections in Canada, which are going to obviously be very, very interesting. So good to be here with you tonight and with your listeners.
And good to be with you as well. And you expect election in St. Lucia soon, do you?
Well, it's the Prime Minister's call. We're constitutionally not due until next summer.
Okay.
But we never know.
Well, on this program, we talk straight and we talk truth. But let's first establish the protocol going forward. You can call me Patches. Everybody does, and that's my name, Alan. Can I call you Alan?
Please do.
Okay. So, over the past 2 years, there have been some very interesting developments within the OECS region, of which St. Kitts and Nevis and St. Lucia are both integral parts of this union of countries, I may call it. Both countries have developed competitive CBI programs to attract foreign direct investment. And I have invited you tonight, Alan, to discuss what seem to be some very interesting parallels between the St. Kitts and Nevis and St. Lucia's Citizenship by Investment programs, the CBI. And there's some key parallels which, without attempting to insult your knowledge, but there's some key parallels between St. Kitts and Nevis and St. Lucia. I can think of the programs, both are designed to raise foreign capital to fund our national development, especially in tourism, infrastructure, and sustainability projects. There are no residency requirements either to live or visit the country for citizenship. And there's visa-free travel. Both provide strong passports with visa-free access to the UK, European Union, Schengen, and other countries. And I can go on. But My first question relates to the establishment of your program in St. Lucia. And I did some research on the CBI legislation in St. Lucia was enacted in 2015. Specifically, the Citizenship by Investment Act number 14 of 2015 was passed to establish the legal framework for granting citizenship to foreign nationals who make a qualifying investment in your country. And it was officially launched in January 2016. And it made St. Lucia the newest of Eastern Caribbean countries to offer such a program at that time. But the UWP administration, which you led, came into office that same year. So was the program launched under your government, Alan?
No, the program was launched under the Labour Party. So they actually did the launching in Monte Carlo prior to the elections.
Oh, it was launched prior to the elections. But your former colleague, Comrade Ralph Gonzalez, made his views known about the CBI, which he never supported from the onset. Recently, Comrade Ralph said this in his parliament. Comrade Ralph had this to say.
I have warned this country about the dangers of selling our passports and selling our citizenship. I don't want to go through all the arguments now because you know them if you're listening to me. I said I'm opposed to selling the passports and the citizenship in principle. I'm opposed on the grounds of practicality. I'm opposed on the grounds that it is not sustainable and that it is reckless to run your country's finances on selling passport and citizenship. No.
Principle, practicality, and sustainability are the words employed to denounce the CBI programs in the region. But is it reckless to try to generate foreign direct investments? That's what it is from the sale of passports, in your view?
So Prime Minister Gonzalez and I have had conversations about this, and certainly as a party when we came into office, we had to make a decision as to whether we were going to continue the program or not. So I want to say this from the onset. St. Lucia or the United Workers' Party decided to stay in the program because as long as St. Kitts, Antigua, Dominica, and Grenada were in the program, in essence, we were in the program, whether we were directly participating or not. And you would know we're in the program because of the Bastille Treaty, where there's freedom of movement of citizens of the OECS. And we almost treat each other as citizens when we come to each other countries. So, for instance, they were Chinese investors that came to St. Lucia as early as the early 90s. And they came to St. Lucia because they had obtained citizenship through the Dominica program and moved their residency to St. Lucia. So the reality is, Patch, that when St. Kitts started the program back in the late 80s, if I'm not mistaken, or is it early 80s?
Late 80s. I'm sorry, early 80s, beg your pardon, sorry. 84.
Early
Yeah,
80s.
yeah.
They really should have gotten the permission of the OECS first. Because what they were selling was not theirs alone to sell, by virtue of the treaty. Now, I can say that to you categorically because Europe is going through the same thing. And the legal test of what we're talking about is about to happen with Malta, because Malta is one of the only European countries that is actively involved in a CIP program. And what they're selling is membership in Europe. So I disagree with Ralph, because if Ralph was so aggrieved by the program, he should have put his foot down a long time ago. I know that when I first came in as prime minister, there was also a question as to access to CARICOM countries. And there was actually a legal opinion given by the lawyers from CARICOM. And the opinion that was given that said that a CIP citizen has the same access to CARICOM as does any other normal citizen because they've become citizens. And so CARICOM actually should have a bigger say and an opinion on what's going on, because remember, they're depending on the due diligence, the background checks of these countries. This is why it was so important, Patch, that the due diligence was being done by the regional security force. Mm-hmm. And should that information have been shared with our other CARICOM colleagues? So I think there's a bigger issue all these years later that still needs to be answered.
It's a very interesting perspective. I'm hearing it for the first time in terms of seeking permission. But are you suggesting in terms of permission from every one of the 14 CARICOM countries?
I think at minimum it should be the OECS countries.
OECS.
I think at minimum the OECS, because the integration and the rights that a citizen is given from one OECS country to another is very high. You can buy land, you can take up residency, you can work. You virtually everything that a citizen would get in St. Kitts as a petition, they could get in St. Lucia. So we are actually selling citizenships to the OECS. And, Ralph, Prime Minister Gonzalez, is caught in a quagmire, because I think that he still thinks in his mind that somehow that these citizens we're talking about now, since the onset of CBI programs, I think the number is close to 250,000 new citizens have been added to the OECS. And those new citizens have full access to St. Vincent. Now, if Ralph, Prime Minister Gonzalez, my apologies, was to do anything to discern the differences between what he considers to be a naturalized or a traditional citizenship, person who's born there or family comes from there, etc., versus an economic citizen, and he was to do that, then he would pave the way for the Canadians and the UK and the Europeans and other countries to provide visa-free access to our normal citizens and not to our economic citizens. And so you see, you develop a legal quagmire when you start now making a distinction between who is a citizen and who's not a citizen, and what rights an economic citizen is going to have versus our traditional naturalized citizens in our countries.
And it's a very interesting perspective you have just raised, and you said it's a quagmire. But in terms of the number you just touted there, 250,000 citizens, economic citizens, if you can call them that, is there any way we can determine how they are disposed in terms of the origins of their passports, in terms whether they got them from St. Lucia, from Dominica? Is there any way we can know how the numbers are distributed, and the nationalities as well? Isn't that important for us?
Well, all of our legislations require us to keep a record of exactly that. So St. Kitts is supposed to have a record, and I think that they do, of how many citizens how many new citizenships they've issued since the early 80s. and what is the origin of those persons' citizenship? Where did they come from? Each one of the countries is required by their own acts to keep that information. The question is, are they sharing that information? Is that information public? Does everybody know what those numbers are?
And that's a big question, because we'll get to the transparency and accountability issues of the CBI in due course, but as we go along in the program. But let's get to the crux of the matters, though, Alan, is that there are many scandals, CBI scandals, that, and in what seems to be all of the OECS CBI territories, with multiple lawsuits. You yourself filed a judicial review claim in St. Lucia. Is it accurate to say that fraud, corruption, and or wrongdoing are all associated with these cases? And is it that's what your judicial review is about?
So, because of the lack of transparency and the lack of any information, we end up having to speculate. And sadly, because of persons not being transparent, then one becomes very suspicious as to what the intent is. So, the court cases I have in St. Lucia are over 3 contracts. One contract is a real estate investment with Galaxy for a hotel. One contract is an infrastructure program with Galaxy, and another contract is a company called BMAX from Montenegro to do infrastructure. In the case of the hotel, we are alleging misfeasance. We're questioning why the government would have given certain concessions or agreed to certain terms in the contract. So we had originally signed the agreement with Galaxy. We allocated to Galaxy 1,000 files at a value of $300,000 per file. So we gave them permission to sell passports to 1,000 families, to be more accurate. And it was for $300,000. And they were supposed to pay an administrative fee of $50,000. The new government came in and after 1 year decided to amend the contract and increase the allocation from 1,000 to 6,000, lowered the price from 300,000 to 200,000, and reduced the administrative fee from 50,000 to 30,000. And very interestingly, also allowed Galaxy to be a promoter and agreed to pay them a commission, which would be the equivalent of the administrative fee. So in essence, if Galaxy sold all of the files, St. Lucia would get nothing. So from a misfeasance perspective, is that responsible? Was the government acting in the best interest of the state? That the hotel that was originally supposed to cost $300,000 now is being estimated to cost $750,000, and you give them files that are worth 1.3 billion US dollars, and along with the $150,000, so close to $1.5 billion for a 750 million supposedly property. And after 5 years, Galaxy has, in their own admission, said that they've spent $15 million on civil works in St. Lucia and another $60 million overseas. So $75 million in total, which is 10% of the cost of the property, the value of the property, and want us to believe that it was supposed to be completed this year and now is going to get completed next year. The second aspect of the real estate program is we're alleging that they have been underselling the prices. So they, by statute, they were required to sell it for $300,000 and then $200,000. And we have evidence, like what happened in St. Kitts, where they were involved in this financing program, which ultimately led to people paying less than the statute amount. On the infrastructure program, we have alleged that the Minister of Citizenship by Investment, who signed the agreement, and basically what the agreement is in simple terms, is that Galaxy was going to lend the government of St. Lucia $100 million US. And in exchange, or as Galaxy puts it, quid pro quo, the government was going to give them 6,000 files to sell up to 6,000 families at a value of $100,000 per file. So they would be lending the government of St. Lucia $100 million, and the government of St. Lucia is agreeing to pay them back with 6,000 files, which has a market value of $600 million. Our question is whether the minister has the authority to sign that deal, because it is only the Ministry of Finance and Parliament that can authorize borrowing money and the reimbursement of money. And certainly all of the procurement guidelines that would have had to go through the Ministry of Infrastructure were completely bypassed. And then obviously the second thing that we are alleging is that they have been underselling those products as well. In the case of BMAX, the company from Montenegro, the main owner, the main director, was arrested in February of 2024, and the company was alleged to be a criminal organization. And we think the government would have known that and still proceeded to sign the contract. So we're saying that they're in breach of our own law and had not done the proper due diligence for that contract. So in a nutshell, that's what our case is about.
Now, you are a businessman, and as a private sector groom professional myself, I was headhunted by a former prime minister who encouraged me to join what I call the public sector. And my first reaction was, hell no, I'm not interested. But he was relentless until he convinced me with two words: public service. But you as a businessman, Alan, coming from the private sector yourself and going into government, you must have understood that an investor takes the risk to invest in your country and expect a reasonable return on the investment. But what we are seeing is excessive profit in all these projects. I can speak to St. Kitts. Is it the same in St. Lucia?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what's the justification? I mean, I'm still perplexed why our minister would have signed this contract. Why? So far less whether he had the legal authority. Why would he sign a contract to borrow $100 million and agree to allow them to get a return up to $600 million? And here's what's happened, Patch. They signed the agreement with Galaxy in January of 2024. And you'll know that most of the OECS countries signed the new MOA in the beginning of March. Okay? Is it fair to assume that certainly in January of 2024, that the governments would have had some idea of what the MOA was going to look like? I think so. I mean, the meeting with the US Treasury took place in February of 2023. St. Kitts itself started implementing aspects of the MOA as early as July of 2023. And I think that you would have to give all the governments a sufficient amount of time to review the MOA before they would agree to sign it. So when St. Lucia finally signed the MOA in June, the government wrote to Galaxy to say, hey, we've signed the MOA, and so we want to amend our contract. And we want for you to agree to either reduce the amount of files you're getting, because the price has now gone from $100,000 to $250,000, or for you to agree to give us and lend us more money, so to create more equity. Secondly, we want you to now bring the money into the CIP unit because the contract had allowed Galaxy to collect the $100,000 and the administrative fee directly. And it's the reply by Galaxy that tells you the story. So Galaxy says there's no reason to amend the contract because when we signed the contract in January, we had already contemplated the changes with the MOA. And the following clauses they made reference to said that if there was an increase in the price, so from 100,000 to 250,000, Galaxy would get to keep the entire difference. So they would get the extra $150,000. That there was no mechanism to change the number of files because the government of St. Lucia agreed to give them 6,000 files in exchange for Galaxy providing $100 million of funding. And they said that they took the risk, meaning that they would always give them the $100 million, not whether in fact they sold all 6,000 or not. So they said it was a quid pro quo. And then they also said that the contract also had contemplated the changes of the administrative fee. And they said if the administrative fee goes up, which it did, it went from 30,000 to 50,000, that the government of St. Lucia actually would provide them with more files to make up for that shortfall of having to pay the extra amount of money. So the situation is actually worse than we all think. And I actually brought it up, Pat, you would appreciate this, in Parliament. And I explained Parliament is the authority that approves all expenditures by the government. The government cannot spend any money unless Parliament approves it. I assume this it's the same case.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
So if a government that is 15-2, they have 15 seats out of 17, so 15-2. There's never an occasion, ever, in which they could bring something to the Parliament that it would not get passed. So here it is that you've signed a contract, you attempted to renegotiate, the government now has agreed to, imagine this, suspend the infrastructure program and terminate the contract. So if you've terminated the contract and Galaxy has interpreted that the contract had already contemplated the MOA, and the contract now, get this, is 6,000 files, not times $100,000 anymore, but 6,000 files times 250,000 is now $1.5 billion. So the contract has a value of $1.5 billion. And the government has admitted that 3,000 families have already applied. So they've paid Galaxy, they've paid the lawyers, they've paid for the due diligence, they've put all their documentation and are simply waiting for the approval of the due diligence and the issuance of their citizenship. If now you pull the plug, what happens is the government now has exposure, meaning that Galaxy would obviously believe that they have some kind of claim against the government. And we know the value of that claim is at least $1.5 billion because I don't see Galaxy giving up the contract of worth $1.5 billion for nothing. So is there a requirement for the government to have come to Parliament to alert Parliament that this is what they've done, because they've already announced that they have suspended the program. They've already announced they've terminated the contract. So they must have some idea already as to how Galaxy is going to react and whether in fact that there's any financial exposure that the state would have. And they have not come to Parliament. They have said nothing to the people of St. Lucia. So we've gone from a $600 million reimbursement ROI for $100 million to $1.5 billion for them to in exchange for $100 million. How absurd is that? How ludicrous, how irresponsible is that? And how can you not think I'm not accusing anybody of corruption, but how could you not think that there's corruption involved?
So, Alan, $1.5 billion. That's
US.
what will be US dollars. Be right. So, what is the value of the asset, though?
There's no asset.
No asset?
No, the Galaxy was going to lend
Or lend?
the government of St. Lucia $100 million US dollars. And the government of St. Lucia reimbursed them the $100 million by giving them 6,000 files. And that is when they were selling the citizenships for $100,000. Now, because of the MOA, the price has been moved from 100,000 to 250,000. So now the 6,000 files have a value, a street value of 1.5 billion. And Galaxy is saying there's no need for me to share any of that money with you because we had already contemplated, we already agreed if there was any changes in the price, 100% of the increase would come to Galaxy.
Now, you have, as Straight Talk understands, rather, that you met with Felipe Martinez. Some refer to him as the Elon Musk of the Caribbean, unofficially. Well, he's now heading the Department of Government Department of Transparency. But Straight Talk understands that you met with Martinez, who invited you to Washington. We also understand that you were the only political leader of the region who accepted that invitation to meet MSR and their lawyers in Washington. The Prime Minister of St. Lucia and his Deputy Prime Minister, our own Prime Minister and his Attorney General declined their invitation. Now, one, what caused you to accept that invitation?
So, Mr. Martinez, who you've described, and I agree with many of the adjectives that you've used to describe him, had invited the government of St. Lucia to come. The CEO of our citizenship went to Washington, D.C., never told anyone. But we found out after the fact that he had gone. And he issued a press statement to say that he went up there on government business. The Prime Minister insists that he went up there personally. And what was strange is that the CEO was named in Mr. Martinez or MSR's RICO case. After the government turned down the invitation, I took up the invitation because when I looked at the case that he filed in St. Kitts, I understood exactly what had happened to him. And he claimed that he had evidence because one of the things that he did is he subpoenaed the banks in the US. So where did it become a point of interest for us? So you have Galaxy, which was in St. Kitts, which his RICO case was against. You had Les Khan, who at the time was the CEO of St. Kitts and now was the president of St. Lucia. And we were asking a lot of questions in St. Lucia, and the government, and particularly the minister, were refusing to answer any of those questions. We asked how many files were issued because we heard that there was a new contract, because when the CEO went up to Washington, D.C., he revealed to MSR, and apparently he also revealed to law enforcement agents that the Galaxy contract had been amended and that they were given 6,000 files. And he also indicated that Galaxy had been given 6,000 files for the infrastructure program. And so we kept on asking questions and they would not provide any of the answers. So because Martinez had subpoenaed the bank accounts of Bank of America and some of the other banks, information that would have implicated Galaxy as well as implicated Mr. Khan would have been very useful for me to know. And also, if in fact we intended to file a case in St. Lucia, to have access to that information. Mr. Martinez also had information, I think over 158 files for St. Kitts, if not more, of evidence that the citizenships were being sold under the price. Now, a lot of persons may not fully appreciate the danger and the ramifications when you start selling the passports or the citizenship under the statute price. So because it's by statute, if you sell it under price, it becomes a criminal offense. You appreciate that, right, Patch?
Yes, yes, certainly.
Okay. So once it becomes a criminal offense, then any money associated with that act becomes criminal. And when it goes through the banking system, the correspondent banks, it becomes an AML issue. And so one of the things that Mr. Martinez's investigation unearthed is that the banks were looking at, if Patch was sending money, they were looking at where did Patch get the money from? But nobody was doing an audit of the CIP program. So the illegality, the criminality wasn't necessarily in the individuals sending the money, but the criminality was that nobody was checking to make sure the right amount of money was being sent. And therefore it was in breach of the laws in St. Kitts, St. Lucia, and some of the other countries. So it was very interesting for me to be able to go and see the evidence that he had. And so the evidence that he provided showed that Les Can, while he was the CEO of St. Kitts, was being paid monies by Galaxy. And he also provided evidence to show that there was underselling. Now, you've seen in St. Kitts where the government has reacted to the case, investigated the 158 files in St. Kitts, found out that there were 13 applicants who basically said, we're not going to pay you any extra money, even though we owe you more money. Some persons have agreed to pay them the difference, and the government continues to investigate the other persons. Meanwhile, the government has made the decision that the agents that were involved, which was a company called Latitude and Riff,
Yes.
that they have blacklisted those companies. Now, all the players that I've spoken about are also involved in St. Lucia. So it was very useful for me to go to Washington and to meet with Mr. Martinez and his lawyers to be able to observe and see the evidence for myself so I could now speak more forcefully. And also to have met the law enforcement agents in Washington, as well as to understand what was taking place.
So do you have these fraudulent contracts, and did you file them in your own judicial review case?
So Mr. Martinez was in the process, if you remember, Patch, of widening his RICO case.
Yes.
So he had already included the CEO in St. Lucia of our CIP program, and he was intending to include lawyers from St. Lucia. He was intending to include ministers in St. Lucia. And what happened is that the lawyers that these persons hired that also represented the other ministers involved, some of them from St. Kitts, some of them from other countries, decided to use immunity. So claim their diplomatic status, and therefore saying that this case could not be held against them. Now, I'm pretty sure if they had proceeded, there was a 50-50 chance as to whether they would have succeeded or not. Because remember, this is a civil case. And I think when Mr. Martinez decided by December that it was just not worth his while to spend that kind of money, because he would have to overcome that legal hurdle first before he expanded his RICO case. He dropped the RICO case and instead became what we know as a whistleblower. So in essence, he filed a complaint with the U.S. government, which is a criminal complaint, that he was misled and there was fraud and criminal activities, and therefore gave the U.S. government the evidence. And it would now be for the U.S. government, in protecting a U.S. resident / citizen, to decide if they want to file charges, because the charges that they would file would be criminal, and the immunity would not apply in that particular case. So I could not file until I got the evidence. I did not get his evidence, which I eventually got in December of 2024. But just prior to that, MSR also leaked the contracts in St. Lucia. So we got the contract, the amended contract with the hotel. We got the contract with Galaxy for the infrastructure. And we also got the contract for BMAX. And I have to say to you that, I mean, it was just shocking to see that these things were actually put in writing and signed off by a government minister that were clearly breaches of our law, circumventing our law, circumventing the Finance Act, circumventing the CIP Act. And that became the nucleus of my case and the evidence of my case, which we filed in February. Now, after we filed the case in February, the government now took a decision in the middle of March to say that they have now suspended the program and terminated the contract. But they're trying to say that what caused them to do that is because the contract was in breach of the MOA. So that's really for the courts to make that determination, whether they believe them that that's the case, or whether the court believes that it was more because we filed the case. And what they're trying to do is to circumvent our application.
Now, going back to the MOA, though, and St. Kitts and Nevis went a step further to criminalize underselling. And this is what our Prime Minister had to say.
In 2022, when our administration took office, our international partners had their eyes squarely on our CBI program. The ill-conceived Team Unity project had resulted in tens of thousands of citizenships being issued for a single venture, putting our visa-free access to countries around the world in grave jeopardy. St. Kitts and Nevis was on the brink of losing that precious visa-free access. If we had not taken the bold, immediate action, we would have lost that privilege. Today, I stand before you to say that our efforts have borne fruit. St. Kitts and Nevis CBI program has been saved. Not only have we re-established it as a leading CBI program in the world, but we have also set a new standard of regional cooperation with our OECS colleagues.
Now, our Prime Minister said that he saved our program. And he spoke about regional cooperation. But only to later find out that after passing the legislation in St. Kitts Nevis to criminalize underselling, he went thereafter and signed over 20,000 certificates of registration. Is it a case, Alan, in the Caribbean that our leaders all seem to like corrupt systems? And it's just like a train. You change the driver, or on a plane, you change the pilot. Is that the case here in the Caribbean?
So I want to say that there was that same interview that you played with Prime Minister Gonzalez. He went on to say that the U.S. government, the British, the Europeans, the Canadians had been asking these countries to clean up their citizenship program.
Yes.
And his interpretation of that was that they couldn't clean it up. And the reason they couldn't clean it up, this is his words, I'm quoting, that if they did it, there'd be no money. And the program was too sweet. So, I mean, I think it's very clear what he's insinuating.
Well, he actually said this. This is what he actually said, so we can be accurate.
You see the Americans under President Trump saying that has to come to an end. Yeah, Canada is the same thing. Britain, they start to say they're taking away. You have to apply for visa now from certain of those countries. And the Europeans now have put it inside of their parliament. Parliamentary committee in the European Union, Parliament has already addressed that question. It's going through the parliamentary process. It's just a matter of time. I saw it coming. It took a little longer because They give them some time to clean up. But I know that the money is so sweet for everybody. They weren't going to do any cleanup. Because if you really, really clean up, there's not a lot of money.
The money too sweet. That's what he said. True?
Look, I agree with Ralph's analysis of the current state of affairs. But I disagree with him that it's the CIP program to blame. It's the people who are managing the program. Because many countries around the world have had CIP programs. America, Canada, Europe themselves have all had CIP programs. I would say to you that I'm absolutely convinced, and that's why our party has clearly established as our policy that if we were to get in, win the next election, we would insist that the CIP program become a singular OECS program and that it's managed out of the OECS and that our CIP units be merged into one unit and we sit down and agree on a formula. So if the money, if we can, a person can choose, I'm just talking at the top of my head here, can choose which island they want to get their passport from. But the money is going to go into a singular fund, and we would agree with the central bank and the OECS secretariat how that money can be used. So whether it's going to be on a per capita basis, whether it's going to be a population, or whether it just be divided equally among all the countries, and how we can use those monies. I think that that's very, very important, Patch, because I think that what has happened is that these countries have lost confidence in the continual promises that we're making, as Ralph said, to clean up the program.
So are we saying...
think,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead. Sorry, Patch.
I'm saying, you preempted my question. Are you saying then that the current disposition of our programs do not lend themselves to accountability and transparency? Is that what you're saying?
I think the sweetness that Ralph is making reference to is the competition amongst each of the islands.
Okay.
So even though you publish a price by statute, there's nothing preventing each of the countries who are controlling the approvals and everything else that's taking place in the programs from cheating. And it's that competition between the countries that's forcing us to do stupidness and expose our own citizens. You know, I want to ask you, Patch, because, you know, I sit here sometimes and it's so clear what is taking place. But there are many persons in the OECS that up to now really don't understand what we're talking about. And I try to figure out what is it. And I think because there's no real effort to produce passports. Do you understand what I mean by that?
Yes.
All you have to do is to have a printer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay? So you just print passports. There's no limitation to how many passports you can print. And that's the commodity that's being sold. And the price for that commodity, that passport, changes on a daily basis based on what everybody else is selling. Now, what the OECS countries are selling are exactly the same. Mm-hmm. Maybe one country has one more or two more countries that we have visa-free access to, but it's the same. And so the only way that you can sell big numbers, so when I was prime minister, we sold in 5 years 850 passports.
5 years.
850. Okay? Based on 11,000 files with an average of 3 to 4 people per file, per family. Let's take the 3 to be conservative. That's 33,000 passports in 2 years. Mm-hmm. Now, if everybody is offering the same product, Patch, and we say that we're selling it for the same price. How can one country sell 850 and another sell 33,000?
True. True.
It's just not possible. Nobody is that better of a marketer. And then people want to talk about, well, they were commissions and all kinds of stuff. The citizens of our region need to study this thing a little bit more.
But does the
How is it, sorry,
Yeah, go ahead.
that our citizens are not being told how many passports were printed? So none of us have a clue. And do we really have an appreciation of the value of adding more citizens? I've told you the numbers that came out of the UK audit. You're familiar with the UK audit?
Yes, yes.
Is that we've sold over 250,000
1,000, yeah.
in this region. Okay. Now, it took the UK to get that number.
But
We don't have that number on the tip of our tongue.
But does the collective heads of government, they just signed an MOA, does the collective heads of government have no access whatsoever to the list of all economic citizens? And
Yes.
they do. But if they do, how is that information not available to the general public?
But Patch, we have an OECS agreement. We do things to be in breach of that agreement every day. I've been to CARICOM meetings where heads of government sit down at a meeting and agree on something. And by the time you get home, there's a letter from a prime minister saying that he's had to withdraw from it. Okay, so from a practical perspective, there's an economic theory called the zero-sum game. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, vaguely, yes.
Okay, so the zero-sum game
Tell our
is
listeners.
that winner takes all.
Yes.
Okay, so do I compromise and be 100% sure that I can sell 10 eggs, or do I believe that I can sell all of my 100 eggs, but that comes at the expense of everybody else? Yes, winner take all.
Yep.
So how is it that we think that we can sit here and play with something, our patrimony, our sovereignty, something as important as citizenship, and play with that like we are? It's like Russian roulette. So 1 year, one country is doing, X number of thousand, and the other country reacts because the agents tell them, look, this country gave me this kind of deal, and they were able to process and approve these things much faster, etc. And then you're saying, okay, you know what, to hell with it. I'm going to do that because I can get more. I mean, listen to what St. Lucia said. St. Lucia said, this is what the prime minister said, Patch. I'm not making this up. He said that he did not want to sign the MOA because we never signed until June, because it was his turn. And he wanted a grandfather clause, which what?
Yes.
That he was going to sell them cheaper than other people. I mean, really? A prime minister would say that?
There's no straight talk without including our calls and our emails, and we'll momentarily open the lines if that's okay with yourself, and entertain some emails. But just for some clarification, because we touched this before, but in relation to the claims, MSR claims that they receive in January 2025, I think it was, the bank statements of Caribbean officials and big CBI operators. I don't know if you've had access to that information. If so, how big is that new development?
So it's pretty big. And I think the question you have to ask yourself, do you believe it's true?
Is it?
So, well, I believe it is true because he had a case, and Bank of America and the other banks, some of them had not originally cooperated, and then eventually they did cooperate. And I think that the banks have realized what a big mess this is. And I think the fallout of that, we have not even begun to feel that yet. MSR were extremely courageous. And he's paying a very heavy price for being as bold and forthright as he is. And I think we need to look at it from a perspective of what was he complaining about? He was complaining that he came down and he wanted to do the citizenship by program. He got approved. And when he started trying to sell, he couldn't sell because other people were selling it at a lesser price. If in fact that he cooperated and went ahead with the status quo and started to discount himself, as a US citizen, he would have exposed himself to a criminal charge. And so he went to the authorities and said, hey, this is what's going on. You need to clean this thing up. And people were giving him promises. Now, MSR is no different than some of the other companies that have come into our region and are experiencing the exactly same thing. If somebody is underselling and the government is not holding their hand to the fire, then what you're doing is you're endorsing it. And therefore, a person has to make up their mind to either join the club or get out of Dodge. And so I absolutely believe the evidence. I've seen the evidence that MSR has. And if he says at this point that Bank of America has provided him now with not only the bank accounts of SKN and the CIP unit in St. Kitts, but now has provided him with the bank accounts of ministers and other individuals, lawyers, etc., I think he does have it. And I think that knowing what strategy he has now, that he's already provided that information to the US authorities.
Okay, before we go to the lines, though, I think we briefly touched the access or accessibility to be it St. Kitts Nevis economic citizens or St. Lucia economic citizens in terms of their travels, in particular within the OECS region. But how would St. Lucia limit economic citizens in their capacity to vote if it can implement a limitation? Can it?
So I would really hope that we will be able to convince the other heads to do this thing the right way. I think that there's so much confidence that's been lost by the international countries, and understand what their perspective is. Our borders are their borders. And particularly now, US is looking for strategic partners, right? So the whole threat of the tariffs are to re-engineer relationships, and that those strategic partnerships are about keeping certain people out. And we have to make up our minds, is the Western market important to us? I remember in 2018 having a conversation with a colleague prime minister of mine. And I said to them, what happens if America says, as an example, they're not going to allow American citizens to go to a hotel built by China? And the prime minister said to me, that could never happen. Well, here we are in 2025, Patch. Do you think that can happen?
But why do the Caribbean leaders, though, why are they keeping secrets in terms of the numbers of Chinese that purchase our passports?
Well, you see, I'm saying to you, so when we talk about protecting borders, this is all part of it, right? Now, okay. Our freedom of movement to these countries, our economic ties to these countries are being jeopardized, and we don't know it because we have no idea, and I'm going to use the word carefully, of the exposure that we have. So it would be the US and Canada and UK that they would make it their business to understand how many citizens we've given and where those citizens come from. They know, and yet the citizens of the country, they themselves don't know.
We don't know.
Okay? And if we're just producing this product, printing passports, it seems effortless. And it is limitless how many passports we can print. And the question then becomes, are the citizens satisfied themselves where the money is going, and are they benefiting from the money? So even if St. Kitts earns $1 billion, as an example, but they sold $10 billion worth of passports, should the people of St. Kitts be satisfied with the billion? But they wouldn't know if they don't know how many passports have been sold. They would not know unless they know how much everybody else earned.
True.
And that is the big secret. So how does anybody evaluate if this program is actually good for the country and good for the citizens if they don't know? They have no
Okay.
idea.
Okay, Alan, we're going to go to the lines, but I just quickly, there's a meeting in Antigua sometime last week, I think it was.
Yep.
I understand coming out of that meeting, there were some new proposals in terms of reform. Is that correct? Are you aware of that?
No idea. No, nothing has been reported. I think that each prime minister has taken it upon themselves to go back to their own countries and report what they want. Our prime minister has said nothing. We know nothing. We saw a picture with him there, and we know nothing.
That's one of our parallels here in St. Kitts. It's now 9:07, my Straight Talk family, and the lines are open. I've have a few callers on hold. I want to, before I open the line, and I'll do so momentarily, I have, for those who joined us in lately, or belatedly, I should say, I have on the program, for the entire program, our former Prime Minister of St. Lucia, Alan Michael Chastanet, who is now, in fact, the leader of the opposition in St. Lucia. He's here until we close the program. I anticipate, though, before I open the lines, that you will respect others, and of course, to achieve that, you must first respect yourselves. Let's just try to be fair to all concerned, and let's just try to build goodwill and better friendships. And in the process of doing and saying those things, let's ensure that they are beneficial to all concerned. And let's, as well as we say and do those things, let's ensure it's beneficial not just to St. Kitts Nevis, but to the entire Caribbean region. My Straight Talk family, with that said, I go to the lines and say good night to our first caller. I'll call you live. Hello, caller.
Good night, Mr. Liburd.
Good night, my
I will also like to say good evening to your guests.
Good evening.
The quote this evening: if once you forfeit the confidence of your fellow citizens, you can never regain their respect and esteem. I repeat, if once you forfeit the confidence of your fellow citizens, you can never regain their respect and esteem. Have a great evening.
I'm not getting that third word. Once you what? You covet?
If once you forfeit,
Prophet.
F-O-R-F-E-I-T, forfeit, for F-E-R, the confidence of your fellow citizens, you can never regain their respect and esteem. Have a great evening.
Have a great evening. Let's go back to the lines. Caller, thank you for holding you alive. Hello, caller.
Yes, thank you, Brother Patches. Good night, Brother Allen. I call
Good night,
every
sir.
brother, but every stranger, Brother Allen, brother, whatever. Thank you for reveal your perspectives. And Brother Patches, you hit the home run. Rejak, as you had, and now we have Brother Allen. Brother Allen, my name is Winston. Welcome. And I'm not afraid to announce my name because I'm on the trail also that you are. And you sum it right. And the messenger, Brother Patches, and also the messenger, Mr. Martinez, thank you. And Mr. Rejak, my hat goes off to you. Now, for what I've heard, you have confirmed what Mr. Philip Martinez was revealing, but they failed to take him seriously because everything wanted to be cover up. But one day, is not everyone going to continue to accept that cover up? I personally don't. I don't believe my government fraganakabul. They were all concerned about the money is sweet. And the rest of the citizens are fools. But not everyone will be fooled, because I, for one, is not a fool. So I will say, continue your quest and continue to nail your nail where it should be nailed. I will yield here because I know I have other partners who will like to come in. But
okay, thanks a lot.
once again, thank you. Yes.
Thanks a lot. Let's take this caller. Are you live? You're live, beg your pardon. Hello, caller. Okay, any response, Alan?
Yeah, we've said two things. You've had two callers. One speaks about the betrayal of trust. If you betray the trust of their people, it becomes very, very difficult to convince them. Yes. Now, sadly, we have politics, and then politics is usual, but we have loyalists that are going to continue to believe in the lie. I used a quote from a Russian philosopher to say that when you start believing your own lies, that's when we're in serious trouble. Mr. Martinez, an MSR, was redeemed. I don't understand why people don't understand that. He went to court in St. Kitts on a judicial review case. The government, from what I understand, agreed that the evidence that he provided showed that there was discounting. Correct?
Yes.
And took action against those persons. Now, what I don't understand, and I'm not making any allegations, but it certainly is puzzling to me. If you found evidence of discounting and you're now blaming it on the agents, Riffin and Latitudes, Grenada had a similar company to Galaxy, and they suspended and terminated the contract with that company. How is it that St. Kitts is not taking the same action against Galaxy? I don't know if you can explain that to me.
Good question. I go back to the lines. Caller, you're live. Hello, caller.
Yes, Mr. Liburd, man. How you doing tonight, man?
Yeah, what's your question, my lord?
Yeah, I'm loud and clear, right?
Yes, you are. The whole world is listening to you.
Yeah, thanks for bringing on your guest there. Good night to your guest there, man.
Good night, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Allen, how you doing tonight, man?
I'm doing good, thank you.
Francis, your guest is still on. I can't hear, man.
Yes, he just responded. He says he's doing good.
Okay, all right. Okay, here we go. Let me just ask him a couple of questions, man. The underselling, right, from get-go is illegal, right? Is that correct? And we had our own Prime Minister, Nevis, went in the Parliament, and I don't know if he's trying to maybe pick up credit for passing a law saying the passport, underselling the passport is a crime. But it just seems to me that, these guys are slide-winding around this corruption. As a little boy growing up, we know thief and the commandments say thou shalt not steal. Why do we need to go in Parliament and pass a law to say stealing is a crime? From get-go, we grew up knowing this type of stuff. You say you went to Washington, D.C. A lot of our leaders are declining going to D.C. Are they scared to go to D.C.? Are they scared that they might get nabbed by the U.S. authorities? Give us some descriptive words that you got for Philip Martinez, because we've been hearing a lot of persons have been calling him a fraudster. And whatever the man went through in his life prior, and he paid his dues to society. I want to get your take on that.
Okay.
And what are the objectives? What are the objectives of Philip Martinez currently, as you met with him in D.C.? And what are the objectives of the U.S. Law enforcement authorities? I'll leave it there for now, and I'll come back in later.
Thank you, Alan.
So I think that the issue of Mr. Martinez's past is in the past. because when the government of St. Kitts would have done its due diligence, that would have been a very easy thing to determine. And the fact is, the government of St. Kitts decided to continue with him. I think that Mr. Martinez, and I say this to everybody, I'm not here to fight Mr. Martinez's fight for him, but I have benefited from the research and the effort that he's put in and the evidence that he's revealed. And he certainly has opened up the amount of information that we had. I would not have been able to have obtained the contract in St. Lucia if it wasn't for Mr. Martinez. I don't know how he did it, but he was able to get it. And we're in the court case with the government right now, and the government has accepted that the contract that we've shown is genuine. That was massive. The fact that he took a judicial review case in St. Kitts, provided evidence, and that the government of St. Kitts has worked on it, fantastic. The fact that he was able to show the bank accounts of SKN, and that he was receiving monies from a company that he was doing business with and he was providing oversight for while he was the CEO, is damning. I have not heard anybody deny. I don't know, Patch, I'm not in St. Kitts, so I don't know whether SKN came out and denied all of that information. I don't know. That's genuinely, I don't know. But I saw the information, I saw the bank accounts, etc. So Mr. Martinez is protecting his own interest. And I get that. I don't fight that fight for him. But he, in fighting his fight, has opened up this Pandora's box and revealed the inner mechanics, and it doesn't look good. And we, as citizens, I include myself, have accepted that. And I think that, for Prime Minister Gonzalez to say the things he said, many of them are very accurate, but it's the reputation of the OECS countries that are being undermined. And St. Vincent would need strong countries. So I don't think that St. Vincent wants to see the demise of our economies. The reality is that the CIP program can do good, but it needs to be managed properly. It needs to be transparent, and it needs to be both the citizens of our country need to understand absolutely what's going on, and the partners that we have in which we share their borders with them, that they also want to know that we're running this project, the program properly. And I think that the US and the UK and Europe have repeatedly said they have no difficulty with the countries being involved in the CIP program. And that's why I think that the only way forward, the only way forward, Patch, is for us to have one program.
One program. Okay, we go back to the lines and thank this call of holding. Caller, you're live. Hello, caller.
Mr. Liburd, good evening.
Good evening, my dear.
I am Kalikwan Auntie. The accident that happened at Whitegate.
Yes.
Yesterday make 1 month since Kalikwan is gone. And that officer that done that brutal work, up to now he's not arrested. And he's still wearing the government clothes. And he's still out there working. What kind of country is this that we're going through in St. Kitts, Mr. Liburd?
Okay.
What kind of country is this? This is a slack country.
Okay.
The commissioner is slack. The commissioner is corrupt. The police force is corrupt. The governor is corrupt. The minister of finance also is corrupt.
Okay, I understand. I'm sorry to interrupt you here, but I have a guest on tonight. I don't know if you're aware of it, right? And we are discussing a particular topic. On Thursday night, though, I intended to raise that issue with your nephew, because I heard the DPP made mention of another accident case as well. But my heart, I empathize with you, and I understand your nephew was buried a few days ago. Was it? Right? And
last Sunday,
yeah,
Thursday.
So on Thursday night,
yesterday makes 1 month.
On Thursday
what kind of government this year?
Yes, but on Thursday night coming, we'll prefer to deal with that matter. If you understand where I'm coming from, I have a guest online. I thank you for
Mr.
understanding.
Liburd is bothering me so much.
Yes, okay, I got you. I got you very much, but I think I'll have to take this other call. Caller, you're live. Hello, caller.
Yes. Good night, Patrick, and good night to your guest,
Good night, sir.
former Prime Minister of St. Lucia. How are you?
I am peaceful, man.
Good, sir.
Oh, okay, that's a good gentleman. I met him several times in St. Lucia. I've been there 8 times.
You did? Okay.
Yeah. Yes. Mr. Patrick, I want to ask the former Prime Minister of St. Lucia. There was a case where Galaxy and the former Prime Minister, Mr. Timothy, sued Mr. Martinez. And then Mr. Martinez turned around and counter-sued them. What was the reason why Galaxy and Mr. Timothy had put a lawsuit on Mr. Martinez? But I get some knowledge from you why Mr. Martinez had to drop the lawsuit, that he counter lawsuit Galaxy and Mr. Timothy, and even involved the former Prime Minister Denzel Douglas in it too, and drop all of that.
Caller, I think that question is should be pointed to Mr. Martinez, but that you're referring to the RICO lawsuit, which he explained he dropped it because of issues as it relates to diplomatic immunity and so on. But the first cases you referred to was a defamation case brought by the former Prime Minister and others. But any other question for the Galaxy? Yes. But any question?
No, I would like to. He's a knowledgeable person, and maybe he can give me a more clear clarity of why the lawsuit took place.
Okay. I give him that opportunity. Do you wish to respond to that, Alan?
I can't. I mean,
right.
I
yes.
do not know enough details. I know the vague details, and I think it would be wrong for me to speculate on something as serious as that.
I thought the same thing. This email reads, "A pleasant good evening to you, Patches, and your special guest, Honorable Prime Minister Chastanet. I wish to thank you, Honorable Prime Minister, he's a former Prime Minister at this time, for your stellar leadership in Caribbean politics and for your development of St. Lucia in which you, like our previous team unity government, looked after all and sundry without fear or favor, especially the ordinary man and woman and those who were considered left behind. Prime Minister, please allow me to highlight a few of your accomplishments that the ordinary St. Lucians benefited from during your sojourn as Prime Minister of St. Lucia. You met the St. Lucia's economy in tatters, just like how Team Unity met St. Kitts Nevis' economy on the brink of collapse in 2015. Youth employment in your country was nearly 60%, and you cut it dramatically as your economy hadn't seen growth in 4 consecutive years. You met the healthcare system in ruins, just like ours are in now, and instead of you driving the car of state by looking in the rearview mirror as a government increased medical support, for the most vulnerable in the country from 800,000 to 5 million. You waived hospital bills and reduced VAT from 15% to 12.5%. You reduced new jobs in the ICT sector alone. How did you get all these things done, sir, when now both here in St. Kitts and Nevis and St. Lucia, our respective governments cannot get anything done or to fulfill any of their campaign promises made to the people? How do you intend to restore voters' shattered confidence in their governments because of our government promised us heaven and is giving us hell? Because our Prime Minister recently told us that we should be happy to have his government as a leaky bucket carrying the nation's water as opposed to a government with a bucket without a bottom. Please to enlighten us, sir. Read this email. Alan?
Look, I think that we went into government with a very clear plan as to what we wanted to do. And that plan started off, Patches, with what's St. Lucia's potential. We had a just over a $2 billion GDP. And we felt as a medium-term strategy, we needed to get that GDP up to $10 billion. The question is, how were you going to do that? So St. Lucia had 5,000 hotel rooms. We clearly said that we need to get to 15,000 hotel rooms. We need to strengthen the linkages. So a farmer can't sell more produce or can sell more produce if there's more hotel rooms. A manufacturer can sell more products if there's more hotel rooms. And it's also to use the tourists that are coming to our island as a sample of the North American markets and the West and the European markets. So you have the ability to find out what products we are producing and whether in fact those persons liked it. And because of now the internet, you have the ability of exporting products to those markets. You have to really take advantage of those tourists coming to your destination to create those levels of linkages. We also felt the call center is as a form of export because we're providing the service from St. Lucia, but we're providing the service to people in North America. And we had a very clear distinction because our citizens had a very good experience in multitasking, which pretty much every ICT sent company that came in recognized that. We were the first to bring in AI. In 2017, we had a company called Ojo Labs that was using artificial intelligence, and they were shocked at how well St. Lucia performed. We understood if we wanted to get to $10 billion and we were going to add 10,000 more hotel rooms, what the constraint to development would be. The airport was too small. We didn't have enough roads. We didn't produce enough water. We had to train more people. We had to improve the telecommunications. We had to do a whole host of things, but they were a clear list of things that we had to do to improve the capacity of the country and the competitiveness of the country. And we just embarked on it. By 2019, we were seeing significant results. And unfortunately, COVID came. I'm very proud of the fact as to how we handled COVID. And one of the things that we did, Patches, is we opened up early. Imagine St. Lucia opened up our doors for tourists as early as June of 2020. And we adopted a strategy called coexist with COVID. You know, we weren't as fortunate as St. Kitts, and you had huge reserves because of your CIP program, and you could continue paying people and you were not having to borrow money. St. Lucia did not have those reserves. Now, the benefit that we got from that, and I want you to think about this, you know, my background, I was in airline business, I was in the hotel business. I was working for Air Jamaica during 9/11, so I knew that the airlines could be shut down. I was the Minister of Tourism during the recession in 2008 to 2010, and I was Prime Minister during the climate change crisis for financing for exogenous shocks. The combination of all of those things, we were able to put into practice. So by opening up our doors to tourists from America, Americans wanted to travel. The US government made a decision they were not going to allow the airlines to close, and so they were subsidizing their airlines. And the planes didn't need to make money. What they needed to do was to fly, to keep the pilots' hours and their crew hours going. You know, it's a detail that I would have had benefit of, and so I would have understood what the airlines were going to go through. So there were only around 5 or 6 international destinations that Americans could travel to: the Dominican Republic, Mexico, St. Lucia, and I can't remember the other 2 or 3. But it meant that all Americans who were looking, we were one of the 5 or 6 countries that would come up. So imagine the marketing exposure that St. Lucia got. And how did that translate? By 2021, St. Lucia had more US arrivals than we had in 2019. And in 2019, we had 180,000 US arrivals. Today, we have 240,000 US arrivals. And that's because of what we did. And we got flights out of Chicago, flights out of Dallas. We got double dailies out of Miami. We got extra flights out of New York. Now, we've lost a lot of that momentum that we had, but we enjoyed a significant bump in our tourism simply by taking that attitude of coexisting with COVID. So I'm very proud of the achievements.
But the downside to that, though, Alan, is how many deaths did St. Lucia suffer?
So when we opened up in June, Patches, until October, we had 28 cases and no deaths.
But overall, for the period,
I'm gonna tell you. Then the government, the opposition at the time, decided to do a march. So we took down the what's it called, the state of emergency. We allowed people to go out more actively. The government went and had a march, and 2 weeks after the march, we had 1,000 cases. And before I left government, we had 88 deaths in total up until July 2021. The new government came in July of 21, and between July 21 and the next 18 months, they had 400 deaths.
That's the downside to that. And St. Kitts, we opened very late, and we had the lowest amount of deaths, 48 too many in the entire world. Good night, Patches and Alan reads this email. I would like to thank you so much for these very educational and very informative broadcasts. These broadcasts have taught me a lot about the CBI and underselling by these investors. Patches, honestly, I really think we need independent candidates or agencies to sell our passports who will not steal our passport money. The OECS coming together to sell passports is not a bad idea, but St. Kitts Nevis is a small island state, and much revenue will not pass down to us. Thanks again, Patches, for these informative broadcasts. And I'll have you respond to this other email as well, Alan, which reads, Dear Patches, good evening to you and former Prime Minister Chastanet. Allow me to answer the question he posed. Answer. The reason the contract with Galaxy has not been terminated by the Jew administration is the same reason Prime Minister Jew signed 20,000 certificates of registration for Galaxy's prison project. Something stinks in Denmark and all fish rot from the head. Your response or reaction, Alan, to both emails?
To the first email, I'm going to say that if we continue doing it the way we're doing it individually, there will be no programs. Because the temptation to outdo each other has shown over time supersedes any sensibility. So where it is you may think that you're going to make less money, but you will make some money, and there will be access to revenues to proceed. It doesn't have to be on a per capita basis. It can be on a country basis, but it's to sit down and agree how we're going to divide the resources, but to know that we're running a program that the rest of the world will trust us. So I think that the better way to go is a singular program. The second one, look, I've only asked a question. The person has offered what they think to be an answer. I'm not in St. Kitts. I would say to you that there seems to be so many inconsistency patches, because as I said to you, in Grenada, the company that was the developer was also suspended.
Yes.
And I think that that's the right thing to have done. I expect in St. Lucia, I don't know what's going to happen. So the government has said that they have suspended the program and have terminated the contracts. But we've not been provided any evidence. We've not heard Galaxy say anything. And so, I take everything with a grain of salt until I actually see the evidence as to what the agreement is in terminating the contract and how much it's going to cost the state or what the compromise is that the state has had to do. I don't believe anything that my government sadly produces.
Okay, let's go back to the lines. I want to thank this caller for holding. Caller, you're live. Hello, caller.
Pleasant good night, Brother Patches.
Good night.
Rascolungi, and to your guests also. It's very interesting, Before I go any further, Brother Patches, I'd just like to inform the listening audience that we're holding a rally on Wednesday, the 30th, at 4 p.m. in the circus for brother Abraham Traore and the Sahel states in Africa. Now, I like to ask the former Prime Minister of St. Lucia a question. You said that basically that the selling of the passport should become one entity in the OECS. So if we could have one entity in terms of selling passport, why we don't have one political entity? We could have one political system.
Well,
because we could have it in certain areas. We could have it also. We could have one political entity.
Okay, is that a question or comment? One from 10 leave 0.
Yeah, no, but you see, that's the part. That's what I'm saying.
I'm just giving the light moment. What is your question? Ask the question.
No problem. Yeah. Anyhow, he's saying that we're sharing borders with the United States. But our borders is not sovereign to us. You know, sometimes I hear these things. So here we have the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine proclaimed that the whole Western world belongs to the United States. I would also like to ask him a question. Would he support independence for black people in America? I would like him to address that.
Any other question? Make a question and I have a response.
I'll leave it at that because I realize you don't have a lot of time.
Yes,
but I like him to address that question.
Okay.
Because the way he's sounding to me is like these imperialists should always control us. And another thing, remember when the West Indies dominated cricket for over 30 years, right? The colonials them change the rules, and us, they're always changing the rules.
Okay.
Because are we supposed to be the footstool?
Okay, I'll have a respond, Ras Kulunji. Alan?
Very different directions. So the first direction is about having a singular government within the OECS. I agree with him that there needs to be deeper integration. But sadly, once there is this idea that we are sovereign countries sitting at the table cooperating and that we maintain our sovereignty, then you're not going to get the same level of integration. So let's just take one example, Patches. We have been arguing for the longest time that we should have a overriding police force, a regional police force.
Yep.
So it means the best of St. Kitts and the best of St. Lucia and the best of our islands have somewhere to go. And it's to understand that criminals aren't in St. Kitts by themselves, they're not in St. Lucia by themselves, but they themselves have become regional. But everybody seems to be scared of doing that. And also, if you have problems in your local police force, you now have a regional police force that can do an independent audit of your local police force. Why are we not prepared to accept that? But we all have this absolute fear of giving up our sovereignty if we become too integrated. The cost of running our governments on a per capita basis and repeating the same things over, 7 ministries of education, 7 ministries of health. Imagine if we could have one healthcare insurance program for 750,000 people. How much cheaper healthcare insurance would be. And if we want to talk about specialties of healthcare services, because now you have a singular healthcare insurance provider, we can dictate who is going to be doing the specialties. Because we speak about it, but it never happens. So there's a lot to be said for a deeper regional integration, but it's going to take some serious leadership to be able to make that happen. In terms of the Monroe Doctrine, etc., look, we're living in a world in which we have to compete. If we were isolated and we didn't trade with anybody, we could not enjoy the same standard of living that we have. So we have to have an open market. And Sir Arthur Lewis was a big believer in that. And he's the person that designed the economic model for Singapore, as you would know. And Singapore has shown that you can maintain your sovereignty, but still having an open market and much bigger populations than we have, 4 million, 5 million. but significantly smaller than a lot of other nation states around the world, and they pack a punch, and they've been able to maintain their own sovereignty, their own integrity, but their policies are motivated by making sure that whatever businesses they're involved in remain competitive. And so I think there's a big difference in reacting to the market forces versus reacting to the political forces. His last question about Black independence in America, well, that's for the Black people to do. I mean, the Black Caucus has existed. Black Chamber of Commerces exist. And there's a lot of persons who have shown over the time that it makes sense for Black people in America to coalesce, to integrate, and to maybe follow the model of the Jews in America. They remain very tight. So I'm not going to be opposed to that in any way, but I don't know that it's going to be possible right now. I could be wrong.
Okay.
Again, I don't want to overly speculate. It's to say that the African Americans in America are going to declare some form of independence. I don't know how that actually would work, and I would love to hear maybe sometime after the show, your caller can explain to me how that's going to work. But I've never heard that one before. I've heard of a lot of other things. I've not heard that one.
Okay, let's go back to the lines and thank this caller for holding. Caller, you're live. Hello, caller.
Yes, thank you again, brother. Yes, thank you again, Brother Patches. And I'm going to direct this question to Brother Allen. Brother Allen, now you said you had the chance to look at the bank records and evidence that Mr. Martinez made available. And pertaining to St. Kitts, and I know the other islands have something there. Is it for St. Kitts a lot of money that is out there under the name of money laundering or due to kleptocratic behavior by our leaders? And if St. Kitts is that and other islands have that same principle in common, well, how bad and how much our country would have been better moving forward if that didn't happen? Give me the magnitude. Thank you. Because I personally believe there's a lot of money out there that should have been in our treasury to sustain our island in terms of the health, in terms of education, technologies and infrastructure, and name the rest, too numerous to mention. And I relate to be a part of recovering that money as a citizen of St. Kitts and Nevis. Now the other island can speak too. Thank you for that. Listening.
Thank you very much. Any reaction, Alan?
Yeah. So when I went up to Washington, I would have only seen the bank transactions that SKN was involved in, and I think that those have been made public already. I have not seen any transactions dealing with politicians or lawyers or anybody else. So it would be for Mr. Martinez and MSR to provide that public information.
Did you speak? I'm sorry. Well,
but money laundering, we already have the proof. If the government has said that the 158 files that Martinez provided, and they have 13 people whose citizenships have been terminated because they refuse to pay the difference. You have 30 or something that have agreed to pay the difference, and they're in negotiations with other people. Once there was an admission that they underpaid, then it means the program has been operating illegally. Whether it's one person, 100 people, 1,000 people, it's been operating illegally. And as such, the banks have been compromised. That's a fact. And how the banks are going to react, we still don't know. And that can have a significant impact on your country. So a simple thing remittances. People sending money from America to St. Kitts requires a correspondent bank. We don't have a correspondent bank. That's not going to happen. And certainly, I expect that the amount of information that people are going to have to provide, even if they're not involved in the CIP program, is going to be increased. Even when you go to get your visas renewed, already we're seeing a tightening of what those standards are, and that is a direct result of the exposure that our CIP programs have created for us. So the citizens are already paying the price for this mismanagement, and the evidence is there of the mismanagement. And so your prime minister is attempting now to reverse gears, to do things now to show the US and everybody else that he's taking this thing seriously, and moving forward, it's going to be impossible for persons to be able to do that. Now, I can't answer to what's going on in St. Kitts, but I can tell you in St. Lucia, he wants to know how much money we're talking about. In St. Lucia, it's 11,000 files. So that means that 11,000 families can apply. And the amount of money that we're talking about is 3 billion US dollars.
Well,
8 billion EC dollars. And the debt of St. Lucia right now is about $5 billion. That's what the value of the passports that we are printing and we're selling. Now the question is, and most St. Lucians know the answer to this question, where's the money? We're not seeing it. There was promises of all kinds of projects, a hotel, etc. None of those things have been manifested. So, you know, you have lawyers making money because they're getting paid their fees. So 11,000 fees at $5,000 US dollars per application, right, Patch? Is 55 million US dollars. That's the number. That you know, once you know how many files that they are, then you can start extrapolating from that based on what it's supposed to be sold for and who gets paid. You can start figuring out the different layers. And once we know that, and we've been doing the calculation, we can't find the money.
Well, we in fact provided this information. Sorry to interrupt you.
That's okay.
On our last program here, where in the approved project, the approved project is costing $88 million, which is in fact just 32 million EC dollars, US dollars, beg your pardon. And if you did the calculations, then you only required 436 shares. And even with 436 shares, there is an element of profit for the developer. But then we sold or we issued some 55,000 shares, which puts us a gross of 960 to 500,000 US dollars. You know, so you see where that's going. And you would know, I'm sure, that the value, as you can see in square footage, right, it's at a particular amount per square foot. And you when you consider the land, the structure, and the investor's profit, I mean, you see what's left for going. But to add to what you said, Alan, though, is that the Prime Minister here, yes, he passed the legislation I think it was in December of 2022, right? But all of 2023, he signed up almost over 20,000 CORs. So he himself committed a crime, and he flouted his own law. The Attorney General said it was a scam. Didn't he advise his Prime Minister about the scam? So these are some of the issues that we face here in St. Kitts and Nevis, and they have to be addressed. But if you have no further comment, I'll go back to the line. Any comments before we go back to the line?
I mean, I don't really want to opine on what's going on in St. Kitts. But what we have seen is what Ralph has seen.
Okay.
Ralph's seen it firsthand. I mean, and he's told you, right, that clearly something is wrong, and there's money. Let me say this to you, Patches. I'm a big believer in governance. So when governments take state assets and transfer them to third parties that are not subjective to the laws of our country, so it means that once a company like Galaxy gets the money outside of St. Kitts and it's considered to be their money, how can anybody tell them how to run the money? And then who they're paying, what they're doing with their money, nobody knows. So that's why I said to you from the beginning, because of the lack of any information, we're forced to speculate. And sadly, when we speculate on these things, we think the worst. Now, I think it's the obligation is on the government to make sure that we're not speculating and that there's full transparency and accountability and everybody knows where the money is going, including how many passports have we printed? You know, maybe we're saying it too emotional, Patches. So if I'm a musician, okay, in the old days, we used to have CDs. There's no limit on how many CDs I could have printed. Is that correct?
True.
That's what's going on with our passports. It's just a piece of paper with a seal on it, and we put an official seal on it. We put somebody's name on it to make it unique to them, but we're just printing. You know, it's not like oil, and you actually see us drilling the oil, and there's an investment. The investment that we're making is we're printing, and we're selling this thing as if it was a commodity, and we're not respecting, in my humble opinion, the rights that go with it, and that lies the problem. We are devaluing what our citizenship is, and because it is so easy to do, people aren't asking the questions, and there's nothing in the system that's forcing them. So in St. Lucia, I don't know if it's the same in St. Kitts. Our CIP unit is obligated by its act to produce an annual report, an audited report. Now, when they don't do it, what's the consequence? So in my island, if I own a house and I have a loan and I have not paid my taxes, then my house gets seized. I don't know if the same thing in St. Kitts.
No,
right?
no.
So how is it? No, go ahead, sorry.
No, I've said no. Our house don't get seized. Our politicians here, we don't have that political will.
Well, when I say the house gets seized, the bank will stop. The bank will stop issuing any monies. We'll freeze the assets until you're current. Yes. Yeah, but so the same should apply to governments. Governments have these acts. And there's nothing to enforce the act. So if the CIP unit, in my humble opinion, has not produced its report on a timely basis, and if the report is not expanded to answer all the questions that need to be answered, then the CIP unit should not be able to issue any passports.
Okay, we're running out of time. We're running out of time. I'm sorry to interrupt you there, Alan. We're running out of time, so I'll take perhaps 2 more calls. In this order, and I'm going to ask my callers to be guided by the rules of brevity, because I'm really out of time. Caller, you're live. Quickly. Hello, caller?
Hello?
Yes, you're live, sir.
Yeah, 2 quick questions, a little different. There always seems to be a reluctance by our politicians once they get into office to discuss things of substance when they meet, especially in the OECS. But once they get out of office, and commendations to the former Prime Minister St. Lucia, we hear all of the good things that could happen. For example, he talked about regional policing, which those of us in the Leeward Islands are old enough to know once existed. But once countries moved into their own political independence, that was done away with. My question is, why don't politicians, especially when they're in leadership, are afraid to call out their fellow prime ministers who renege on agreements during the time that they're in office? The second point, again, I'd like to talk about it. In our islands, is it the systems that we have, and we have common systems to the OECs? Is it the systems that are bad, or the people who are products of the society are by nature bad? Patches, we all went to the same institution, Principia non homines.
I recognize
because these people know about it, but they don't practice it. Yet when they get out of office, they give us a whole different picture, so to speak. So my thing is, Mr. Chastanet, why are leaders when in government reluctant to call out fellow prime ministers for reneging on agreements that were made? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'll take this and make this my final call for the night as well, caller. If you okay, Mr. Caller, I was gonna guide you by the rules of brevity. If you can get back in, yes, caller, I can put you on again. I'll guide you by the rules of brevity because I'm certainly run out of time. What's your question?
Okay, yes, Patches. I know you're running out of time. So 2 questions. I have 4 questions, but I'm breaking it down to 2 questions real quick. One, can the guest say to the public where he was born? And number 2 question is, whenever the person attached the signature to the certificate of registration for the passports, is there monetary value attached to the signature? And that's my 2 questions. Thanks, man. Have a good night.
Thank you. Alan, we have some questions you can dispose of or dispense of before we give you a final wrap.
Sure. I was born in Martinique. My parents had opposite blood types, and so I needed a transfusion, and unfortunately the transfusion could not have been done in St. Lucia. My father's family is 4 generations from St. Lucia, but I was born in Martinique. I didn't get the second question that he asked, so maybe if you heard it and you can repeat it to me, I'd appreciate it.
The two other questions are why politicians don't call out their colleagues? Are the systems bad, or the people are bad?
So, I think there are many examples of where I called people out. I mean, Prime Minister Motley and I attempted to get all the governments to agree to a $1 tax off of our airlines to put that into our regional security force. I think I've made my points while I was Prime Minister and even in opposition, so much so that the former Prime Minister Rowley called me out on it because he was the lead minister of security. But it's not always that you can call out your colleagues, because you have to continue working with them. And even though you may have differences, you have to respect sometimes that when we're in meetings, it's being told in confidentiality. But certainly, this is not the first time, and certainly when I was Prime Minister, I complained bitterly about the lack of cooperation, the lack of follow-up. And I believe in regionalism. I think that cost effectively we can run our countries much better if we shared some of these services. I don't think that we give up any sovereignty by having a Ministry of Education, a Ministry of Health, having a singular police force. I think it just strengthens us, and I wish that more people believe that genuinely, and we would see it happen. I still aspire for that. Persons would remember of my idea of branding. I mean, the person spoke about West Indies cricket. I've said, okay, I believe in the word West Indies versus Caribbean, because Caribbean is a bastardized name now. Cuba says they're part of the Caribbean. Panama says they're part of the Caribbean. Colombia says that they're part of the Caribbean, whereas there's one West Indies. So the success that we had with West Indies cricket and the branding that it created in the UK, Australia, and in Pakistan and India is there for everybody to see. South Africa, they know us as the West Indies. I want you to imagine, Patches, if every 2 years we were able to put on a world track and field championship. And why track and field? Because track and field is big in Canada, it's big in the US, it's big in Europe, which are big tourism markets for us. And we competed against the top countries in the world as the West Indies. Imagine what that team would look like. Huh?
Yes.
Now, the thing is that what I want us to appreciate is that we would be world class. And so the brand of the West Indies is world class. So there's a lot of benefits to be had. And so I'm a huge regionalist person. Now, the second caller asked a second question.
Yes,
I don't remember.
I think, caller, you're there. We missed your question.
Yeah, my question, I just wanted to reiterate it. The person who attached the signature to the certificate of registration for the passports, is there a monetary figure to that? Thanks.
Well,
no.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
No, not that I know of. I mean,
there's a fee. There's a fee that's legislated per unit.
And that's for the passport, but it's not necessarily for the signature.
Right.
So the fee is really. There are multiple fees. There is a fee that you pay for the due diligence, your background checks. There's a fee that you pay to lawyers or the agents. There's a fee that you normally pay the promoter. And then there's the developer. But the state gets whatever the amount that you say you're supposed to get for the citizenship. The state's supposed to get that amount of money, and there's supposed to be verification of that amount of money, and that's been the problem. So I want to say this to you, Patches. You know, we start things and they're great ideas, and I think that the person that really developed the real estate program, my very dear friend, the person I have a tremendous amount of respect for, Enrique Scarrett, and I think it was a really good idea. It was a mechanism to help increase the capacity, the room capacity in St. Kitts. But I think that we've outgrown that, and there are just too many loopholes now in the real estate program. And I think that getting the money as a donation, how it originally started off, is the cleaner way of doing it. And we know the money is coming into the account. It's not going through any third parties. It's coming directly to the government, and the government then can build up its reserves and use the funds to lend money. So, for instance, you know, you have a company in St. Kitts called Range.
Yes, the Hyatt Hotel, yes, Park Hyatt, yes.
So they were going to do a work in St. Lucia, and I think the direction that we were going in was the right direction. So what we were saying is, for the Range, go ahead and promote my donation program. I'll give you credit for the business you bring in, and I would put that money into an account, and then I would lend you the money for the hotel. So it means that the asset value remains, but it's actually serving a purpose to help somebody to build a hotel. And it wouldn't have to just be Range. It could be a Petition. It could be anybody that could get access to these monies to borrow them. But the citizens of the country would recover their capital investment. But there has to be more transparency in any program, in my humble opinion, in today's world, that's allowing the money to go into somebody else's account. It's a problem.
Well, the real estate problems that we still have here, because our around the landscape is littered with unfinished projects, and that is because I believe in the beginning, my understanding is that you could only draw down from escrow based on the stage of the project, but I understand that our second prime minister had actually changed that and decided to sell off plan. which created the problems. But there are lots of issues. But in your rap, Alan, we didn't really speak too much about the banking risks that our countries have faced. So if you can address that in your rap and any other matter, I'll be totally grateful. But here's your parting shots.
Look, I think that we've covered a lot of ground. That the CIP program, in my humble opinion, is a great program. We should be doing everything that we can to preserve it. But we need to understand what some of the problems are and some of the mistakes that we've made, and we've got to recover those things. The big one right now is the exposure for the correspondent banks. So for your callers to maybe understand what a correspondent bank is it is a bank that's generally in the States where all financial transactions go through. So your credit card payments, any U.S. transfers, anytime you're transferring money to somebody else in the world, the money goes through there. After the recession in 2008, 2010, the U.S. Congress changed the law because they recognized the amount of money that was going through the banks illegally. And so what they said to the banks was they were no longer going to fine the banks based on the size of the infraction. So if it was $1,000 that was illegal, the fine was relative to the $1,000. They turned around and said they're going to fine the banks relative to the size of the banks. So we just saw Toronto Dominion. I don't know if you were familiar with that, Patches, that got fined, was it $3 billion or some insane amount of money for money laundering? And what is happening here, because the citizenships are being sold underpriced, it is considered to be money laundering. It's an illegal act which becomes criminal, and because that money is criminally associated. So, for instance, there's an example in Barbados of a minister where, in a court case, the insurance company in Barbados admitted to bribing a minister. And it was traced that the minister took the money and transferred it to his bank account in the U.S. Are you familiar with that, Patches?
A very small amount.
$30,000.
Yeah, yes.
Right?
Yes.
The government of Barbados never charged him, never prosecuted him, never did anything. But the U.S. government found out about it, confirmed that it was the case, and when he came to the U.S., they arrested him.
Went to jail.
And he went to jail.
Yep.
Okay? So all these people who want to go around saying that we're being the boogeyman and we're overreacting to this situation, we're not. You had a situation with the premier of the BVI. It was money, but it was also drugs. It means the source of the money came from an illegal source. When you undersell the citizenship where it is by statute a particular price and you undersell it, it becomes money laundering, and you contaminate the entire system. And it questions now, why did the local banks not do their due diligence? Who is doing the audit of the CIP program? Here it is right now that the governments are proposing to have a, what is it called? A regulator, right?
Yes.
What? It's a joke. Rome is burning, and you're taking over a year and a half to put a regulator in?
Yes.
And I asked a simple question. I ask it again on your show. And the governor is of the bank is in St. Kitts. How is it that they're not contemplating, from what I understand, that the regulator is also going to be the contractor general? Shouldn't it be that every CIP contract that's signed with an agent, with a promoter, and with a developer ought to have to be registered with the regulator? Because then the regulator understands what the contract is, and therefore it becomes easier to determine if in fact they're in breach, correct?
Yep.
But no, they're not going to do that. So what it means, the regulator has to wait for a whistleblower and then go and investigate the matter? I mean, Are we serious? These are the things that the rest of the world is looking at us and saying, are these people for real? Because what it comes across as is that we're procrastinating.
I want to ask. I want you to answer this question. I know that's your final wrap, but I'm not certain if I ask you before if you met with the Department of Justice while you were in Washington. Can you confirm this? And a final question.
I can confirm that I met with law enforcement agents, but I would rather not say which departments.
Okay. So what would be Alan's view on a representative action in St. Kitts and or St. Lucia to a representative action against government and the developer for an accounting? There must be a role of the court as the third leg of government. That's a question.
Repeat that again.
What would be Alan's view on a representative action in St. Kitts, Nevis, and or St. Lucia to a representative action against government and the developer for an accounting of the projects?
We have to learn from our past, and there are too many checks and balances that have been how do I want to call it? Too many checks and balances where it didn't work. People that were supposed to do their job. So you spoke about the first one, the Attorney General. And the Attorney General is not one individual, it's the office. The vetting of contracts. The contracts that were signed in St. Lucia were in my humble opinion, I'm waiting for the court to make the final determination, we're in breach of our Finance Act, and we're in breach of the CIP Act. Our directors of finance, in terms of the money, because if this is a program that was approved in Parliament, I assume that St. Kitts approved your CIP program in Parliament. Yes. They have a requirement. The Auditor General has independence. They've been given independence. How is it that our Auditor Generals have not insisted on auditing the escrow accounts? That's a massive failure in our system, because we have a whole bunch of offices that, if they were doing their jobs, would happen. Civil society. Why is it your bar association has said nothing? Now, the public will tell you, because the lawyers were benefiting. But it's not supposed to work like that, right, Patches?
That's certainly not.
Your chamber of commerce, your banking associations. Where are these voices? Now, I want to say to all of us, because you started off by saying something, and that's how I want to end. I want a stronger society, but democracy doesn't come easy. And persons are going to look at the enforcement of rule of law in our countries when our civil society acts. Our foreign direct investment becomes safer and more trusted when civil society stands up for it. Where was civil society to stand up for Mr. Martinez? There was nothing preventing civil society from meeting Mr. Martinez and saying, is he being treated unfairly? Okay? And understanding that in most of our societies, that when governments want to malign a foreigner, it's very easy, correct?
Yes.
Because we say, it's a foreigner, and this and that, and blah, 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 okay? Civil society needs to stand up and understand the importance of foreign direct investment in our countries, and said, no, government, you can't do this. And we want to arbitrate, or we're going to get involved because we want to see this issue resolved, and we want to understand what has been happening, because it's their money too. But we too often give politicians and governments way too much latitude. So in my instance, if I did not have the means myself, personally, to have filed the judicial review case. It would never have happened.
Yep.
How is it that a leader of the opposition is literally asked to defend the democracy and hold the government accountable by themselves? Do you think I get any staff? I get a secretary and a messenger. they say the opposition is being funded. So these are basic questions that we have to ask. I call it, we as society and citizens must look past the veil and stop presuming that the Auditor General is doing their job and the Attorney General is doing their job and they're always going to do the right thing, because sadly, our region is replete, and so are other parts of the world. I don't want us to believe that this is only a problem in part of our world. Democracies around the world are struggling with this. The difference that I say, Patches, is that we can ill afford it. And so we need to take it much more seriously. And the person who called up about sovereignty, our sovereignty stands more when we're able to stand up and protect it. And people recognize our appreciation for the rule of law, for truthfulness. You spoke about that. But it doesn't come easy. And in small societies where people are related. So I have a minister of CIP, Ernest Hilaire. His lawyer before he became the minister is the Attorney General. Mm-hmm. The chairman of the CIP was his lawyer. The person that represents the biggest agency in St. Lucia is his best friend and was his lawyer. And he's also the lawyer for Galaxy. He's the lawyer for BMAX, and he was lawyer for GPH. You know, this deal that we did in the cruise ship stuff. How incestuous is that? The guy who is the CEO of our CIP unit is best friends with the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister is the godfather of his children. Okay? How does that happen? Because we don't have like the American system where people have to go in front of Parliament to be approved.
Congress, yeah. Mm-hmm.
The law gives the minister the authority to appoint these people.
Yep.
And so we're depending on the benevolence of things. We just recently had the introduction of a sovereign fund here, Patches. I'm sorry to take your time, but
no, that's fine. That's fine.
So listen to this. The act that they passed, the minister, which is the Prime Minister, gets to appoint all 9 board members on the sovereign fund.
Oh.
The Prime Minister gets to appoint the corporate secretary. The Prime Minister appoints the custodian, and the Prime Minister appoints the investment officer. The Prime Minister can then decide how much money they want to take from CIP to put in this fund, and the board can transfer that money into the name of the custodian who was appointed by the Prime Minister. Now, if something goes wrong, how does any citizen take it to court? Because all those things became legal because it was passed in the House, of which there are 15 members of the government and 2 members of the opposition. So whatever the opposition says, it's talking into the wind. Mm-hmm. Okay? Civil society doesn't say anything, nothing. And so we've created a legal form of corruption. Because anybody who's creating a sovereign fund, the most fundamental thing of a sovereign fund, it must be independent of ministers, of government. And here it is, everybody who's involved is appointed by the Prime Minister. So I would just say to you, I'm pretty sure some of those things happen in St. Kitts as well.
Yep.
We can't just say that because it was happening those ways. We need to put checks and balances in place and make sure those checks and balances actually work. But thank you for the opportunity of speaking with you tonight. It was a great pleasure. I learned some stuff from you and from some of your callers, and so I want to thank them very much for their kindness and their respect, and to let them know that it's also very mutual on my part.
Well, if I say the reciprocal, I wish to say the same as well. It was a pleasure having you, and you certainly need 3 hours. But I'm looking forward for some time when we can resume this conversation, perhaps not on the CBI, but any other matter as well, since you've been here. And for those who may have joined us belatedly, we had a conversation with the Honorable Alan Michael Chastanet, a businessman, politician, former Prime Minister of St. Lucia, and now leader of His Majesty's Loyal Opposition. And he said a lot. The lines were going, but my Straight Talk family, we are out of time. And I want to say thank you very much, Alan, and have yourself what's left, the best of what's left for the rest of the night. And we look forward to connecting with you sometime. But you've given us a lesson, and we are going to ensure that we take heed from the things you have uttered. But thanks a lot, Alan Chastanet. And my Straight Talk family, my time is done and I've got to run. I want to thank Almighty God for guiding our conversation tonight as always. I want to thank you, the many listeners, those of you who viewed, those of you who sent emails, those of you who called. Remember, you are the ones who make Straight Talk. So on behalf of Alan Chastanet, or Alan and Patches, we say good night, be good to yourselves and to all whom you meet. And remember, whatever your mind conceive, that you will achieve. But first of all, you must believe. So bye-bye until we connect on Thursday for another edition of Straight Talk.
For the morning light, give him thanks and praises for taking me safely through the night. For the rest of